very excited about listening to and learning from Simon today. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Simon Bender, and he's going to talk about Windows Virtual Desktop. And so, Simon?
Yes, and now you got their name right, so well done. So today I'm going to talk about understanding Windows Virtual Desktop and how it fits into Microsoft 365. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter, and I'll give you some more details about myself in just a few minutes. So today, the technology I'll present to you is something that will disrupt the digital workplace. In a bad way for some, perhaps, and in a good way for most people. And it's a technology that will force you to learn new skills, but also a technology that will enable you to do new things and really learn the technology for tomorrow, today. And Windows Virtual Desktop, as I see it, is really the gap between Azure and Microsoft 365 and something that enables end user compute for everyone out there. Regardless of size, regardless of where you are, you can consume this service. And today I'll be taking you on a treasure hunt, or at least that's what I'm telling my daughter when she loses my keys or her puzzle pieces. But I'm going to introduce you to something that many of us couldn't have imagined, say 8 or 9 months ago, even though it makes so much sense if you look back at it. So today we'll search for Windows Virtual Desktop, how it fits in, why it makes sense, and why Windows Virtual Desktop, in my opinion, is the missing piece of the puzzle. Because this is a 180-degree turn from what many of us, including myself, believed Microsoft were about to do. We have all seen the changes Microsoft made to support on Windows Server, Office, and so on. Many of us believe that RDS would be excluded from Windows Server 2019, but it's still there. And this really fills a vital part of the Microsoft story, regardless if we talk about Microsoft 365 or Azure or something else. It ties them together like few other things do. And to me, it's about enabling organizations that perhaps weren't able to do virtual desktop or apps in this way, at this scale, or at this kind of performance previously. You could say, and I've said this previously, that Windows Virtual Desktop in a way democratizes end user computing, the digital workplace, and the era of cloud and edge computing. So we'll start this webinar by explaining what Windows Virtual Desktop is, how it works, how you get started, and so on. And I know that some of you probably have either some other technology closest to heart today, maybe Citrix, Parallels, VMware, RDS, and that's totally fine. I'll explain what Windows Virtual Desktop is. And if you feel that this is something that could help yourself, your customers, your partners, feel free to use it, and I'll tell you how to get started, what it is, what to think about, and so on. We'll then look at how it integrates with Microsoft 365. And some of you may be familiar with Microsoft 365. I'll explain what it is and what you can use it for to really enhance that experience and especially secure that experience. And the reason why this is important is how does it fit into the modern workplace of today? How does end user computing fit into the modern desktop, the modern workplace of today? So we'll look at that, and especially the integrations with Office 365 and Microsoft EMS and Intune. And lastly, we'll look at it. Why does it matter so much? Why do I think it matters so much? And why should you at least be aware of this? Because it does matter. It does matter from the perspective that it democratizes end user compute. And I'll explain why I say so in just a minute. So my first goal on this journey is to give you an introduction to Windows Virtual Desktop, what it is, what it isn't, and again, how you can get started. My second goal today is to explain to you how you could benefit from using Windows Virtual Desktop. But again, I'm not here to convince you that it's better than anything else. To me, we're way past that point, and we should only aim to provide the best possible experience for the user at a motivated cost. So that's something you need to consider. And especially many people in the Citrix community have felt and said that this is something that Microsoft does to compete with Citrix. And I'll explain to you why I don't think that's the case. And my third goal is to show you how you can combine Windows Virtual Desktop with Microsoft 365 to create not just a great user experience, but also a more productive and secure and future-proof digital workspace. So either this could be a quick stop for you to admire the view, or this could be a start of a journey towards something great. So who am I then? My name is Simon Binder. I live in Sweden, in Linköping, 2 hours out of Stockholm. I work as a principal solutions architect for ATEA. ATEA is the main IT consultant firm in the Nordics and Baltics. I was awarded Microsoft MVP about 6 months ago in enterprise mobility. So most of my work is focused around enterprise mobility, but I do most of my daily work around the workplace as a whole. So I have experience with most of the technologies we will be talking about today, and I'm always very happy to learn something new and see how we can combine technologies to create something better. I'm also part of Knee Deep in Tech, together with 2 of my colleagues, where we provide the world with information about the latest and greatest from the Microsoft world especially, but the IT world in general, in podcasts and blog posts. I do speak quite a lot. I can't even remember how many talks I did around Europe and the US last year, but I'm passionate about speaking. I do coach quite a lot of people when it comes to speaking as well. I'm a Pluralsight author, Microsoft certified trainer, and a real penguin fanatic. I absolutely love penguins. So before we head on, like Doug said, save your questions for later. We will have time to answer them. And if I don't have time, or if I can't answer them, and we'll get to that in a second, I'll provide you with answers later on. But do remember that a lot is still under NDA. Windows Virtual Desktop is still in private preview. It's said to be going into public preview Q1 this year, so we have a few weeks left. But if you are interested in being a part of the public preview, sign up at aka.ms/Windows Virtual Desktop. And of course, penguins and hedgehogs rocks. So let's get started. And like I said, I know that some of you may have another technology at heart. And I'll try to adopt the content of this session to suit everyone, regardless if you are a VMware person, a Citrix person, a Parallels person, work with Microsoft, or work with everything. But please feel free to, if you have any questions in regards to how it compares to a specific technology, please ask. But I'll do it as general as I can. So let's get started. What is Windows Virtual Desktop? And really, if you look back at it, how did it come to be? About 1.5 years ago at Ignite 2017 in Orlando, Microsoft stood up on stage and said, we now have the remote desktop modern infrastructure, so the next generation of RDS and Windows Server. And we want you, our partners, our customers, to evaluate this and really look at it and say, tell us what you think, which people did. And the biggest feedback item they received actually were, okay, this is great, Microsoft. It's scalable, it supports multi-tenancy, it's easy to manage, it's easy to set up. Why don't you provide this as a service to us? And a year went by, and there we had Windows Virtual Desktop. So it's really RDMI under the covers. And this is due to customer and partner demand. But we still have RDMI, of course, in Windows Server. We still have RDS, and we definitely see that some organizations will keep using that, and that other organizations will definitely keep using Citrix, Parallels, or VMware, or something else to do end-user compute. But how do we then explain Windows Virtual Desktop? And I will be explaining it by using quotes from the official blog post that was released just after Ignite. So Windows Virtual Desktop is the most scalable service to deploy and manage Windows virtual machines. And by saying this, it's actually promising quite a lot. You should be able to scale. And when we think about scaling, you should think about scaling up. So hosting huge environments, thousands of users, thousands of desktops, and so on. But it's also vital to understand that it's also scalable downwards. So if you don't use anything, you won't be paying for anything. And it's also very, very easy to start off because you only really need one single desktop, one single user to use this service. So it's scalable from one person up to hundreds of thousands of people and desktop if you like to. And you're able to do that by using the cloud. So in this case, Azure. So it's easy to set up, it's easy to scale. We'll look into how it scales in a couple of ways later on. But it's also about licensing, that this scales even down to very, very small organizations. You currently only need E3 or E5 licenses, or the equivalent when it comes to actually using virtual desktops. And they're the licenses that enables you to do that to use Windows Virtual Desktop. It's no upfront cost other than the licenses, of course, which is an upfront cost. And then you pay for the actual consumption in Azure, which we'll go into in just a sec. Windows Virtual Desktop is also the only service to enable multi-user Windows 10 experience. So looking at it, today, many of us and many of you that are listening are using servers in your virtual environments. The reason for that is that one server can be used by multiple people and multiple users at the same time, which haven't been possible with Windows 10 or any Windows previously. But with Windows 10 multi-session in Windows Virtual Desktop, we can give the user the full Windows 10 experience and also enable you as an administrator to get the most out of your service by letting users log on to a regular Windows 10 semi-annual channel VM. So you can use that instead of servers. So remember that, and I mentioned it now, I'll move back to it later. The Windows 10 version you're running here is the semi-annual channel 1. You will be forced, or you will have the possibility to upgrade at least depending on which version you choose, either every 18 months or 30 months, depending on the release. But this creates a great user experience. It creates a great administrative experience. Since it's still Windows 10, you manage it in the same way as you're managing your regular Windows 10 machines. And it also enables you to run a desktop operating system instead of a server operating system, which should give you some better value for money than paying for extra servers. But you can run Windows Server in Windows Virtual Desktop. 2016, 2019 is supported. You can also run Windows 10, and we'll get back to one other operating system that you're able to use later on. But there are perhaps a few reasons why you should look into this and why you could say that this isn't for you. So it could be licensing, that you don't have the correct licenses to run this service, but you have licenses for servers. It could be about the Office support, what you are allowed to run on Windows Server versus Windows 10 and so on. It could be in terms of long-term servicing channel, that you don't want to service your Windows environments, which I highly recommend you to do. And there could actually, in some cases, I haven't heard about any, but in theory, there could be applications that are built for virtualization, but perhaps not are built to run or supported at least on Windows 10 in a virtual environment, but could be supported on Windows Server. So there are a number of different reasons to choose one or the other, but I definitely see that most people that will be using Windows Virtual Desktop will be choosing Windows 10 multi-session. And that's actually a very cool feature and a very cool operating system. And again, you manage it in the same way as you manage your regular Windows 10 machines. Windows Virtual Desktop is also optimized to virtualize Office 365 Pro Plus running in multi-user virtual scenarios. And there are a number of reasons why this is important. So as you may be aware of, you won't be allowed to run the Pro Plus versions of Office 365 on Windows Server 2016 from 2025, if I remember correctly. So we need something else. We need something other than that. And we need something that can run Office fully and where you can leverage all the great features of Office 365 in a multi-user session scenario. Because you are struggling today, and we are struggling today with managing Teams, managing OneDrives, managing Exchange mailboxes, and so on. And some of these things will be addressed with Windows Virtual Desktop. So one of the most obvious things, and that was also perhaps a surprise, but a really good surprise, was that Microsoft a couple of months ago acquired FSLogix. So we'll see how the FSLogix technology is integrated into Windows Virtual Desktop and Windows 10 multi-session. So that will hopefully optimize quite a lot of the Office 365 performance and usability in the multi-session environment. It's also built from the ground up for multi-user licensing. So that's something that's fully supported and easily configurable in terms of Windows Virtual Desktop. You also get some quite interesting benefits by running this service in Azure and in the actual Azure service. And I'll show you a couple of demos later on, but as you may know, OneDrive and Exchange are also Azure services. And now, since the desktop will be running fairly close to them, you should have a rather good performance towards those sources. This was also interesting and something that I do think will help a few organizations. The only service to provide Windows 7 virtual desktops with free extended security updates. So as you may be aware of, Windows 7 will be end of support January next year. So less than a year now to migrate off Windows 7. If you, for some reason, are forced to remain on Windows 7 with your entire estate or most of your estate when it comes to fat clients or virtual clients for the matter, you are able to purchase extended support for it. But that's a fee per device, and that will increase per year. But if you run your Windows 7 machines inside of Azure or inside of Windows Virtual Desktop, you actually get that support for free up to 3 years. So if you have applications, if you have systems that are suitable to run in a cloud environment, because that's also vital to remember. I'm guessing that some of you have worked with end-user compute solutions in the cloud previously, or even in a remote data center. And even though you would need to run some of your applications on Windows 7, it may not be suitable to run that application in the cloud if you don't move the entire application to the cloud. So that's something to consider as well. But you are able to run Windows 7. You are able to virtualize and publish Windows 7 apps and desktops to your users. That, of course, won't support multi-session, but it will enable you to run apps, run desktop, run systems that you need, and therefore migrate off Windows 7 on your physical machines. Windows Virtual Desktop is also the most flexible service, allowing you to virtualize both desktops and apps. And it's flexible in many different perspectives. Yeah, we are able to publish desktops and apps. That makes total sense, and that will suit different needs. But it's also flexible in terms of VM sizes, and we'll look at that when we set up the service later on. Because you're actually able to use any VM size available in Azure to run your virtual machines on. And that's really something you should think hard about, because that enables you to run extremely powerful machines. You can run graphic accelerated VMs. You can run VMs that are enabled for nested virtualization. So you can run Hyper-V inside of your Windows 10 VM if you like to, which enables a number of cool scenarios, and where you only pay for what you use. So that's also vital to remember. you only pay for the desktops you use and when you need them. The good thing about that is that, again, you pay for what you use. You don't pay more than you need to, and you can optimize your environment to suit your business day, your business year. The downside of it is, of course, that you pay for what you use. And if you aren't scaling correctly, or if you overestimate the performance you need, it's very, very hard to calculate how much it will cost. Still, you can use the Azure calculator and so on, but you really need to test in a real world scenario to see how much it will cost and see if it makes sense to you. And it's also easy to deliver a great user experience regardless of the user and their platforms. It's fully supported currently on iOS, Android, Mac OS, Windows, and I know that IGEL is working hard to get full support for it in an upcoming release. But that's also the challenge currently, that we are today using companies like IGEL to deliver a great user experience. And this service puts new demands on how we connect. That's really the reason why Microsoft have been forced to rewrite many of the clients that they are using to connect to Windows Virtual Desktop. And I'll explain why in a second where I show the service, but it has to do with Azure AD and AD and where you will need both to run Windows Virtual Desktops. So with that, let's head into a demo. I'll just see if everything is, yeah, everything looks good. So let's start with, let's see if I zoom it first and foremost. So in the Azure Marketplace, and as you can see, this is a private offering in the marketplace, so you won't be able to see this as of yet. You can provision a host pool from the marketplace. The Microsoft Windows 10 image is available, and we also have a community project on Azure Monitor for RDS and Windows Virtual Desktop that you could look into. But let's head into the host pool, and we'll set that one up. Oh, sorry for that. So we create a new host pool. So the first basic settings we need to configure is all about what the host pool should be named. So what kind of resource will be in this? Let's call it IGEL webinar. We can then choose if you want to use a pooled desktop type, or if you want every single user to have a personal virtual machine and connect to that. In this case, let's use pooled. We then need to put this into a resource group. And this is the thing I mentioned previously, that you learn quite a lot about Azure by using Windows Virtual Desktop. And if you learn Azure, you learn a lot about the public cloud. So this is a very useful learning curve, really for anyone. So it's great fun. And you then choose where to put that host pool. The service currently is running in the US, but you can put the actual VMs wherever you are. And I'm absolutely convinced that they will scale that service to other regions later on. But this location selection also enables you to put your VMs where they are most appropriate in terms of data access, if they need to access data on-prem or in another data center and so on. But you can scale also globally. We then get some help from Microsoft when it comes to the actual scaling of the host pool. So we can choose if the usage of this pool will be light, medium, and or heavy, which doesn't say too much. It's a matter of how many CPUs and so on they will need, and how many users that will be using this host pool. So let's go with 10 users. And as you can see, it now scaled down from, we can do it again. So if we have 100 users, it scales to 4 standard D8S V3 machines. And if we have 10, it scales down to 1. If you head into change sizes, as you can see, we can choose whichever size we like. If we would like, let's scroll down, 64 cores, 256 gigs of RAM, 80,000 IOPS, that's available. We can get, like I said, VMs with graphic cards, NVIDIA graphic cards. We can get it with support for virtualization and so on. So we can actually choose whichever machine we like and need. We'll then choose a prefix for the virtual machines. So every single machine will be created with this prefix for you to automate later on. But this is what we can select in this kind of setup. We'll then configure the actual VMs. So we can choose either to use an image from the gallery, which would give us a vanilla Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session image. We can choose to get an image that we created ourselves, either from blob storage or managed images. And that's probably what we will do mostly, I would say. You choose your disk type. I would say for any purpose, always choose SSD. If you want to test and minimize your cost, you can go for HDD. But to get good performance, you really should use SSD. So now to the actual authentication to the service. Because as I said, you will need both AD and Azure AD. To connect to the actual service Windows Virtual Desktop, you use Azure AD and Azure AD credentials to connect to it, which enables us to do a lot of other things, which I'll get back to in a few minutes. But the actual VMs need to be AD joined currently. In my environment, I'm using the Azure AD domain services, so I don't have a domain controller, rather than a PaaS service for AD in my environment. But you could, of course, set up a regular domain controller in Azure as well. So I'll enter my credentials. So this is the account that will join this VM to the domain. We can configure an OU, we can choose manage disks, and then we configure the network. This is also a vital skill to learn, and it will be very useful for you moving forward, how to manage networks in a public cloud. And we also configure subnets. And move on. So next up, we get to select a tenant group name. And the tenant group name is, if you look at it, that would be your main control layer if you are a service provider, for example. And then we have a tenant under that. So we can have multiple tenant groups. We can have multiple tenants. In my case, I have a default tenant group and one tenant inside of that. And then I need to add another UPN or a service principal that will add these VMs to the actual Windows Virtual Desktop service. So the first credentials we entered was all about, okay, we want to AD join this machine. These credentials are, we want to add these machines to our actual service. And that's what we need. So what it will do now, if we go ahead with this, and I'll show you how it looks later on, it will provision the VMs, it will add the required softwares to the actual VMs to connect to the Windows Virtual Desktop service, and it will also connect them to that service, enabling them to be published to the users. But this is super easy. It's also vital to remember that if we look down here, we can download the ARM template and parameters for this actual deployment and reuse it. So the marketplace is actually a good place to learn and to get started. But in actual production environment, we will see more automation using ARM templates and also PowerShell. So when the product group built the service, they decided that we want full automation and we want to enable our partners and users to enhance the service. So they actually started off with building all the APIs, so they are done. They then put PowerShell on top of that. And we are now seeing the first real user interfaces for it. But early in the private preview, we only had PowerShell and ARM templates. So we can see how it looks here. Start with that, get RDS context. And we get our deployment URL, our tenant group name, and the username, which I'm currently using to authenticate to the service. And if we look at my host pools inside of my tenant, I have a number of them. And let's look at this. So this specific host pool has a max session limit on 999,999. That should be enough for most of you per host pool. But the load balancer type is actually where I would want to point out. So breadth first. These are the included scaling options. You have other ways of scaling Windows Virtual Desktop, but what you choose first and foremost is, should this host pool scale over breadth or depth? If you choose breadth, like in this case, it will evenly distribute the users across all the available VMs. That's good to ensure that all the users get the most performance out of the service, but may cost you more since it will actually have a number of VMs up and running that may only be half utilized. If we put it into depth instead, it will fill up VMs with users until they are full, setting you can configure, and it will then start the next VM. So that would be probably the most that makes most financial sense, but which may not be the most efficient in terms of user performance and user experience. And when they're done, I have a couple of machines already done here. I have them in different resource groups depending on what they are doing, if they're apps or desktops and so on. That doesn't look too good. Let's see if they are on. Yep, thank you. So I have a number of machines, and if you look into them, they are just regular Azure VMs. Great. So the experience in general is this Chrome instance, for example, is something that I've published from the Netherlands, and it's actually easy to see where it's located. If we go to YouTube, for example, we should get a lot of Dutch movies here. Go on. So it's obviously available in the Netherlands data center. But as you can see, it works just as we expect it to work. It's smooth, it's easy to use, and this literally took me 20 minutes to set up, including that marketplace deployment. It's done. We can also use, so this is a published one. So as you can see down here, it's available, sorry. Wow. It's available in the start menu, the taskbar, and we can only see, like if you're used to RDS, this is what you would see from an RDS deployment as well. If you want to run this on any other machine, which currently aren't supporting this, so Linux, for example, you can use the web client. It's great in many perspectives, and it's super easy to secure as well. So this is a full desktop running inside of my browser. Whoa, thank you. No problem at all. Works as intended, and we'll get back to this later on. So how to integrate it with Microsoft 365? So Microsoft 365, for you that doesn't know, it is that Microsoft 365 is really a licensing bundle, which includes Office 365, Enterprise Mobility and Security, EMS, and Windows. And one of the main focuses when it comes to Microsoft 365 is all about security, which we get both in Windows and Office 365, of course, but especially in the Enterprise Mobility and Security suite, which includes Microsoft Intune for device management and access management. We get Azure AD, which we'll get into later on, and Azure Information Protection. And what this enables us to do is to really enhance and secure the experience of Windows Virtual Desktop, because we can easily, for example, like I will show in a second, enable multi-factor authentication by just a few clicks on our Windows Virtual Desktop service, and use something called conditional access to only apply the MFA requirement if you're logging on from an unknown device, as an example. So we still need to secure our access to our environment and also our environment itself. But we use EMS for the access management and perhaps also the management of the VMs. When it comes to Office 365, this is all about productivity. There are, of course, security features inside of it, but that's usually something that the user doesn't see or integrate with. We can use Office 365, the full Office, with a great experience inside of Windows Virtual Desktop. You also see that Office will be one of the most commonly published applications if you want to run a full Office Pro Plus anywhere, or the regular volume licensed Office, of course. So this is a great way to get up and running instantly on any machine, anywhere you are. And this also enables you, since you have Windows 10, Office Pro Plus, or Windows or volume license Office on a regular Windows machine, your plugins, your macros, and so on would probably work just fine, and you can publish them to devices also. And we, of course, have Windows. Like I said, this is a semi-annual channel, which some of you may have thoughts about. I myself, I love Windows, and I'm passionate about Windows as a service. We can take all your questions on that later on. But we get all the goodies of Windows 10 inside of Windows Virtual Desktop. We can use Windows Defender. We can use Windows Defender ATP, so advanced threat protection. We can use all the productivity tools like virtual desktops inside of Windows Virtual Desktop as well. But it's also important to remember that we can open up new use cases where you know all the good things about end user compute, where we can use a very, very secure, very cost effective, very easy to manage endpoint and publish a full Windows experience to that, securing access, securing data, and so on. But remember that you have the full experience of Windows 10 available inside of Windows Virtual Desktop. So I'll show you two quick demos now. First and foremost, let's look at some of the good features of having your data very close to your VM. So if we look at the throughput of the connection now, this is my OneDrive, where I have a few quite large files. They are, as you can see, in the cloud currently, but I want access to them straight away. So if I click always keep on this device, it will start to download it. And as you can see, we have a rather throughput. It will probably end up around somewhere around 0.5 gigabit to 1 gigabit, but it will peak at close to 3 gigabit per second, which enables us instant access to very, very large files as long as they are in Azure. But as you can see, they are close to done already. And this is 20 gigabytes of ISO files. So if you run AutoCAD or if you run Adobe or something other that uses huge files, you can actually save them in your OneDrive folder and get instant access to them inside of a Windows Virtual Desktop, which really enables you to do some cool features if you move between a fat client, a thin client, or a browser on your mobile device or your computer at home. So the other thing I wanted to show is that if I sign out from this and head back into my Intune console, I have a conditional access policy here, which basically says that my user, if I try to connect to the Windows Virtual Desktop services from anywhere, if I want to grant control, require multi-factor authentication. So if I enable this policy, and save it. We'll now log on to it again. Hopefully. And previously, I wasn't required to do a multi-factor authentication to get access to the service. I choose my account, enter my credentials, and I'm enforced to use a multi-factor authentication to sign on to this service. And this could be any supported hardware tokens, the Authenticator app, texts in my case, or phone. But that's really all you need to do to enable multi-factor authentication for Windows Virtual Desktop. And if we move back to the policies here, we can actually set a number of different conditions. So if we don't want our users to use MFA on network locations which we know and consider safe, if we only want to enforce MFA if they are using the web client, we can configure that as well. So we will only enforce MFA where it's actually needed and where we see a benefit of using it. And since it's a part of the same Azure service palette, it's very, very easy to enable it. It's, again, literally 5 minutes to set up multi-factor authentication for users for Windows Virtual Desktop. So, and why does this matter then? As I said in the beginning, it does make huge sense because this scales from very, very small organizations up to very, very large organizations. It's a great way to get started with Azure and the public cloud in general, and it will help you doing and finalizing your Windows 10 migrations, as it will enable you to virtualize your apps and move on and move off the older operating systems. But it also is a good indication on a few things when it comes to Microsoft. This clearly points out the road ahead, that end user computing is one of the vital tools moving forward. And if you then choose to use any other technology, that's up to you, but this is something that Microsoft will keep investing in. It's an investment in Windows 10 as well, but this is something that they see as a great operating system to run in the cloud as well. And it also shows that Microsoft listens to you, because this service is all built on feedback from customers and partners, and Microsoft is really all about getting your feedback. So let them hear when you have the ability and possibility to try the service out, try it out, and leave feedback to Microsoft. And again, it will democratize end user compute, because it will enable organizations that may have been too small or that may have lacked resources or whatever it may be. Maybe they haven't got the skill to run the more the older version end user compute tools. But now everyone can get started. It's very, very easy. And it's all about you, how much it will cost. I'll finalize the presentation and then we'll get into the questions. So Windows Virtual Desktop is coming. We'll hopefully see it before end of Q1. And this is something we need to consider. You need to be aware that it's here and how it could change the way you look at it. Like I said in the beginning, many people that I know that work a lot with Citrix have seen this as a competitor. In some cases, perhaps, but in many cases, it will also be something that will enhance the Citrix experience, because Citrix have stated that this is something that they will integrate with. And how will that affect your environments or your customers' environments? It's up to you to choose your ecosystem. That's something I recommend all of my customers to do. Really, I don't care if you choose to use Microsoft, Apple, VMware, IGEL, whichever of these great organizations as your main technology partner. But choose one and integrate everything on top of that. And if you choose IGEL, that's absolutely something that then we can integrate in anything on top of that later on. But choose one ecosystem to build your environment on. Don't try to go with several strategic partners and try to make them get along, because that could be a struggle for you. And again, it democratizes end user compute. It will enable, for you that are consultants, new markets, new possibilities, a new way to benefit from this. And for you that are customers, it will enable new experiences. And it will enable organizations that may have a very limited amount of users that need this kind of technology to leverage this kind of technology. So I've given you an introduction to Windows Virtual Desktop, what it is, what it isn't, and how you can get started with it. And as you can see, it's fairly easy. I've also explained how you can benefit from it, but also I'm here to tell you that it's still in private preview. It will soon be in public preview. There are limitations, of course, and you need to consider the cost, and you need to consider how to access data and systems that may be on-prem or in another cloud. And I've also shown you how you easily can combine Windows Virtual Desktop with Microsoft 365 to be more productive, more secure, and also build a future-proof digital workspace where you can empower your users to choose whichever endpoint they like while remaining controlled of your data and your access to it. So this session has soon come to an end, but I hope that for some of you, this will be the start of your Windows Virtual Desktop journey. There are people, perhaps in this very webinar, that doesn't see the greatness in the service. And again, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you that Windows Virtual Desktop is the answer to all that's bad in the world, but I strongly oppose people that judges and even discourage people from using a service that they haven't tried and still in private preview. So sign up for the public preview, try it out, and leave as much feedback as you can. There are many questions to answer still, but there are still bits and pieces that will be fine-tuned. But if you have been talking to the product groups and the developer teams, they are passionate about this and want to sort it out as quickly as possible. It's a great team building it. And I'm so glad that you've spent a couple of, close to an hour with me at least, and I'll be happy to answer all the questions. Because this service will bridge gaps that have been very hard to bridge previously. And you will learn a lot by evaluating Windows Virtual Desktop, even if you choose to not use it later on, because you will learn a lot about Azure and a lot of Microsoft 365, which will build yourself a vital and attractive skill set and empowering people and organizations to achieve more. You will be building the workspace of tomorrow, today, and you'll be enabling a mobile and empowering work style starting today. So thank you, and now I'm happy to answer all your questions.
Simon, that was just absolutely wonderful. Thank you so very much. I very much enjoyed it, and I hope everyone out there listening did also. If you have questions, please use the questions little area there on the panel of GoToWebinar, and Simon will be here to answer them. The first question is, did you say IGEL didn't quite work with it yet, or just not all parts of it? You know, it's not out yet. So, you know, we work with all versions of remote desktop services and terminal services, blah, 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 blah. So if there's anything new, we'll support it. And you know, it's business as usual.
Yeah.
Simon, anything to add there?
Yeah, and I met your colleagues that are developing this, and they are at the forefront of what's available. It's possible to run it in the browser today. It works great there. But we will be seeing support from IGEL as soon as it's out. I'm absolutely sure about that.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, he says, hi, Simon, kudos for mentioning the data gravity issue. So you're a data gravity fan. I like the penguins thing, by the way. I didn't know that you were fascinated by penguins, but that's a different question. That one threw me for a loop, buddy. Okay, I said, how does WVD affect services such as Citrix, AWS Workspaces, VMware, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a very good point. I would say that it depends on where you're coming from. So It will be a competitor in some perspectives, of course. In the Citrix case, we'll definitely see how it combines the different services. But again, it's about choosing your cloud and choosing your vendors. I do see that some organizations are perhaps, from an infrastructure point of view, better off by looking at AWS or other cloud services. But if you are a Microsoft heavy shop today, I would say that it's probably the easiest service to integrate with. So I do encourage the competition, of course. I think that's good, and I think that will only be beneficial from everyone. As I see it, it's a very easy thing to get started with. It makes sense. Many organizations already use the licenses you need to run it. But you will also definitely see some parts where AWS or Citrix or whatever are better currently. So it's a competitor. I definitely see it as a good competitor and a good competitive landscape.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Citrix, I've always said Citrix and VMware within the hypervisor is sort of like Oracle. You don't necessarily buy them because you want to, you buy them because you need to. Not that you don't want to, but the requirement is really that you need to, because you need the maturity that a solution like Citrix brings. And for quite some time, Citrix will be more mature. Will have that, those point solutions for the enterprise that new solutions like what Microsoft's bringing just do not have yet and should not have yet. So it's business as usual. I agree with Simon.
Yeah. And I think that also, like, if you talk especially about Citrix, since Citrix and Microsoft have such a close relationship and partnership, I do see that if you need a user interface for this, you could choose Citrix as your control layer for this and just leverage the good things about Windows virtual desktops inside of Azure as well, which you can do with Citrix Cloud today as well.
Absolutely.
I think it's a vital part to remember that this doesn't necessarily replace whatever you have today. It can complement it or it can integrate with it.
You bet. Hey, Simon, I have a question for you. If somebody's out there listening and they say, this is quite interesting, I want to keep up with this, I want to learn more. Do you have any resources or sites or Twitter people that you would recommend people to follow or consume, read or consume?
Yeah, I would say Scott Manchester, who's I think is principal program manager of the RDS team. He's a quite frequent Twitter poster, so I would look up Scott Manchester, especially, and he will point you in. Probably look at who he's retweeting or answering or replying to, and you'll find some good resources there. I could also recommend the former FS Logics people. That would be good people to follow.
And of course, follow yourself. And
Yeah,
what's your
course.
Twitter account again? Yeah, absolutely. What's your Twitter account again?
At Binder Tech.
Perfect. And guys, thank you so much for watching this webinar. Again, join the IGEL community if you're interested in more stuff like this, and to stay up to date with what's new with IGEL and what have you. A big shout out to David out there. I know you're listening, and hello. He's talking to me on Slack. What else do I say? But I forgot one thing. IGEL's giving away a Porsche this year. So if you're interested in learning more about how you might win a Porsche, please head over to igel.com and definitely check that out, because heck, not every day you have the chance to win a Porsche. So definitely enjoy that and learn more about what IGEL's doing. Simon, thank you so much for taking the time to do this for us. It's 5 o'clock here in Berlin, top of the hour, so we're ending on the perfect, on perfect time. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar today.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Have a good one, guys. Take care.